Okay, good evening. We're up. Today's daf is Ayin Aleph. We're holding on Ayin Amid Beis. We're holding on Ayin Amid Beis. Okay, so the Mishnah had said that it's also the Chodesh L'fnei HaOmer, before you bring the Omer. The Gerses here, they go back and forth. This one says Omer. Minani Mili. Now, we're saying that the five grains, not only sa'irin would there be a din of asa to eat, but any of the other four grains would be asa to eat. So Menani Mili, how do you know that? Amrei Shlokish, Asya lechem mimatzah. I think we did this yesterday. It says lechem koli v'karmel, right? And matzah says lechem oni. So just like matzah is the five grains, so to chadash is the five grains, right? The isra is what the five grains. That's how you'd know that. V'liktzor lifnei ha-pesach and minani mili. So what's the Gemara's kash over here? Fred, the Gemara, it says over here, v'liktzor lifnei ha-pesach, or we have lifnei ha-omer. Again, it depends upon, right? So how do you know that that the five grains, right? It has to be from the first thing that's cut. How do you know it has to be from the first thing that's cut? So Rabbi Yochanan Asya Reishis Michala, just like Reishis Arisa Sechem, and it says Reishis from Michala, right? It says what's Lashon Reishis, Reishis Arisa Sechem, Reishis Moshe Sechem, I think it is. Okay, so it says Lashon Reishis. So just like by Chala, Reishis is first. Who hadin what by Reishis Arisa Sechem? Who hadin that what? That ratius by Chodosh, it has to be the first of your Katsira. That the Oime has to be the first. So guys, Menoni immediately that the Oime has to be the first. It's not a din. This is not a din in the five grains. This is a din in how do you know it has to be the first cutting? Where it doesn't so we're learning it out from Chala, where it says Reish Lariso Sechem, and this is Rashis Kitzirchem. So just like over there, Chala is the first, it's in the first, so too over here is the first. Now, the Gemara says, my koidem la'omer. Now, what does it mean, koidem la'omer? What does it mean when it said my koidem la'omer? What it says over here, the Pirish, when the Mishnah said that chodesh is asa koidem la'omer, guys, right? The Mishnah had said that chodesh is asa koidem la'omer. What does that mean? That chodesh is asa koidem la'omer. What does that mean? Rabbi Yoina Amar koidem kitzira sa'omer. Rabbi Yoina says it's before you cut the omer. So you're cutting it on the night of the 16th. You're cutting it the night of the 16th. And after you cut it, you wait till the morning. And the morning, then it'll be mutter. With Heir Mizrach will be mutter. Rabbi Yossi bar Zavda Amar, koidim habas omer. It's when it's before you bring the omer, which is, in other words, you can't eat chadash till you bring the omer. So the Gemara is asking, when it says over here, koidim la'omer, what does it mean? That you can't eat before the Omer. So according to Rav Yoina, it means before you cut the Omer. Once you cut the Omer, the Chodesh is permitted, right? Meaning as soon as you get to the morning, right? That little bit, guys, you're cutting it the night before, right? You're cutting it the night before, so what do you mean that you mean Ktsira? That it's mutter after Ktsira. It's not mutter after Ktsira. You have to wait the night, yes? If you cut it the night before, you can't eat it until the morning, until it's daylight. And the answer is, Rashi says, you don't have to cut it the night before. You can cut it right before daybreak also, right? You can cut it right before. That's still considered night. That little bit is not considered, is nominal, right? That little bit is not too much. And therefore, it's shaykh. So again, we're learning that when the Gemara asked over the machloikas between Rabbi Yoina and Rabbi Yossi bar Zavda is at which point in time is the Chodesh permitted? According to Rabbi Yoina, it's computed after Ketzira, and which Ketzira is synonymous with daybreak. When you see hairpin in Mizrach on Tezayin, and Yossi bar Zavda says, no, you have to bring the Omer. Tanan. The Mishnah said, Asurim b'chodesh lifnei ha'omer, v'liktzor lifnei ha'pesach. Okay, it says it's asa, it says lifnei, the chodesh lifnei, you bring the Omer, and to cut it lifnei ha'pesach. Now, Bishleim il-mandi Omer koidim avos Omer, kind of like ka'orav lahu. You're not mixing them together. In other words, fellas, there's two zmanim. There's Zman Kitsira and Zman of Achila. Guys, look at me. The Zman of Kitsira is the night, And the Zman of eating is when you bring the Omer. So therefore, the Mishnah learned two separate cases because why? It's two separate things. But like Reb Yaina, that the Zman of eating is Katsira, so why are you learning two separate things? It's Katsira and Katsira. It's not Katsira and Achila. Because the Zman of Katsira is the Zman of Achila. It's synonymous. So therefore, it's difficult to go ahead from our Mishnah to explain Rabbi Yehuda Shita. You hear Rav Nosson. Yeah. In other words, it's speaking, it's the same Mitzias. Says the Gemara. So Bishleim Lamadi Amma, according to Rav Yossi Bar Zavda, the Amma Koidim Avas Oimer, Haim Leikarav Lahu, Vitani Lahu. Therefore, you mix it together and you learn two separate cases: the case of a Kitsira and the case of Achila. Elamandi Amma Koidim Kitsira Sa'omer, like the Manda Amar. It's Koidim Kitsira Sa'omer, meaning Rabbi Yaina, Lervinu v'Sninu, Asurim b'Chodesh v'Liksel Fnei Pesach, because it's both at the same time. If you want to learn the machlokes between Rabbi Yaina and Rav Yossi Bar Zavda, it's not going on when you could eat, guys. It's not going on when you eat. It's going on at which point in time, up until which point in time does Hashrasa have to take place? So outside again. We've been hacking that if once something takes root, at that period in time, the Omer will matter it. So we had plant A the other day, it was after the Omer, right? As long as it took root, right, beforehand, then at which point in time does it have to take root for the Omer to matter? That's what the machlokes is on. In other words, according to one opinion, it has to be b'shas ketzira. It has to take root before ketzira. Another one has to take root before you bring the Omer. So the machlokes is on the not on the achila. The machlokes guys on the shrashla. Initially, we thought the machlokes was what? On the achila, right? And there you have a problem because katsira. But now if you're telling me it's at which point in time does ashrash have to take place, then it's kishmak. So that's what the Gemara says right now. Ella, we're going to learn Ella Iyitmar Aseifa Itmar. You want to learn the machlokes, it's going on the Seifa. Imeshrishu Kaidam La'omer, if it takes root before the Omer is brought, Omer Matirin. My Kaidam La'omer. What does it mean before the Omer? What has to take place? The ashrash has to take place before what period in time? Kaidam La'omer is, it can mean what? It can mean what? It can mean one of two things. Rabbi Yoina Omer, Koydem Avvas Omer. It can mean before you go ahead and bring the Omer. Before you bring the Omer, if it takes root, then the Omer will be materit. Okay, that's before you bring the Omer. Rabbi Yossi Zavda Omer Koydem Kitziras Omer. That's an earlier time, the night before, right? The night before it has to take root. The night before. Good. So that is the machlokes between the two. Okay, so guys, outside one. Let's just reiterate. We have machlokes between Rabbeinu Yoina and between Rabbi Yaina and Rabbi Yossi Bar Zavda. We have machlokes. Right. One says, again, they switch off in both places, so I'm just saying one. One says Ksira, and one says bringing the Omer. Initially, we think it's speaking about what? About which point in time you're able to eat. If that's the case, then you should have learned one case in the Mishnah of bringing the Omer and the Chodesh when it's Mutta, which is Ksira. Ella must be speaking about the Hashrasha. At which point in time does it have to be mushrish in order to be kimat mutter al yedei the omer of that year? According to Rabbi Yoina, it's before, as long as it takes root before you bring the omer. According to Rabbi Yossi Bar Zavda, as long as it takes root before you cut the omer, then what? Then it will be okay. Rabbi Laza, Amalei Rabbi Elaza, Rabbi Yoshia Didare. Said Rabbi Elazar to the Rabbi Yoshia of his generation, which is very interesting. Of course, who else he's speaking to? So you look at the top Rashi, guys. Rabbi Yoshia the Dare, Shahaya B'Dairei, the Rabbi Yoshia that was in his generation, Uben Giloi, and they were born under the same mazel. La Fuke Rabbi Yoshia Hagadol, as opposed to Rabbi Yoshia Hagadol, Shahaya Tana. Rabbi Yoshia was the bar pluk to Rabbi Yonason, guys, right? They have machloikas, the bar pluk to Rabbi Yonason and Rabbi Yoshia. He was a Tana. So the Gemara is saying they said to Rabbi Yoshia the Dari. It's interesting. We usually don't point it out, but
I guess it's like, we say Chaim, but the old generation remember Chaim first, now we know Chaim Kanievsky.
It's very funny. I had a tkufa with Chaim Shmulevitz. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? But now Rav Chaim is Rav Chaim Briska. But yeah, but now Rav Chaim, everyone's Rav Chaim. Yeah. Everyone, Rav Chaim is. Yeah, it's a good zushtel. Rav Chaim, anytime it says Bismanas Rav Chaim, Rav Chaim Kanievsky. Years ago, you meant Rav Chaim Briska, right? Right. Chaim Briska. Anyway, so Rabbi Elazar said to Rabbi Yishaya, Like tisyaseh v'krecha, don't sit down, don't sit literally sit on your knees. Ad mefarish lahosh masnisan. And until you explain me this Mishnah. In other words, I don't understand Pshat in this Mishnah. I want you to explain to me Pshat in this Mishnah. Now, what is he asking him? Right? Ad mefarshis ayvan. Minayin la'omer shemate b'hashrasha. We're taking for granted a given that the oimer matis b'hashrasha. There's a machloikis at which point in time does it have to be mushris, but everyone admits as long as it is mushrish, as long as it is what it is rooted, the oimer will be matir. That's what we know. As long as it be rooted, the oimer will go ahead and be matir. That's the given, right? As long as it will be rooted, the oimer will be matir. So now the pasuk that we have to know is the takriv minchas bikurim. That last week's parsha, and bikurim is the oimer. Aviv. We said aviv is the first. Koloi is toasted by Eish. Gorash, it should be what? Coarse. Carmel, it should be ripe. Okay? Takves minchas bikurecha. So now, we're going to go ahead and dash in this pasuk, right? So you want to know that, how do you know that it has to be hashrasha? Minayin lo'imer shemuta b'hashrasha, without growth. Hashrasha, guys, without growth. Guys, that's the key. Without growth. Just it has to take root, even if it didn't grow anything. The chsiv aviv. When it says it's the first crop, lav mechlal, can't we infer the lav aviv, that it must be what? In other words, this you bring. Masha and Cain is one that you don't bring, which is what? One that is mushrish. Says the Gemara lo oilam the ayel shlish. Says no, dilma, the aleph, guys, the aleph in the bach is important. It always is important, but it makes no sense without it. Dilma, guys, begoy is dilma, right? The aleph, I'll put in the word dilma, right? So in other words, you have no proof. Dilma, the lav aviv, it's taka, it's not the first cutting. Ul oilam the ayel shlish, but in other words, you went ahead and you contrasted, guys. You contrasted aviv versus nothing. Maybe it means it's not what? It didn't bring a shlish yet. Maybe it grew a shlish, which is a third of its growth. Elama Shmuel, mehelcha chomesh b'kama. So the pasuk says, Shiva Shuas Tisbalach, 7 weeks you should count. Mehechel chomesh b'kama, when the sickle hits the kama. When the sickle hits the kama, so when the sickle hits the kama, lav mechal de'ikad, the lav bar hemish. It must be the something that what? That the sickle can't cut, right? Meaning what? It's in the ground. Guys, meaning it's in the ground. Says no, dilma, the lav bar hemish, uloilam shachas. It's not in the ground, but what is it? It's shachas. In other words, we're contrasting aviv versus nothing. No, it could be a shlish. Cherchel chemish versus nothing. No, it could be shachas, which is less than a shlish. It's animal fodder, right? Amrev Yitzchak kama meherchel chemish b'kama. Kama means standing grain. La mechal v'lav bar kama, right? Now, so l'chayra. Now, guys, if you've gone ahead and been memayit a shlish and a shachas, then it must be what? The next one is nothing, right? It must be the next one is nothing. Well, not exactly. Maybe the labar kama can't stand on its own. Lo oilam agam, but you can bend it. Lo oilam, you can bend it, but it's there. Meaning, you don't have a raya to it being in the ground and not there at all. Again, we want to know how do you know it takes root and there's nothing there. From the two psukim we mentioned, you have no raya. Ella, where does the raya come from? It comes from a person who can shmos. In Shmos Kof Gimel it says, "V'chaga kotze bikurim asecha asher tizra basodeh." Now it says Tizra b'Sadeh. Okay? So what do we darshan? Eloma Rava Asher Tizra Mishas Riya. Asher Tizra, when you plant, means it's from the time you plant. So Amalei Popular Ravi Hachi Afagav Yishrish. Guys, if you planted, so why don't you say as long as it's in the ground, it's going to be mutter? Why don't you say if you put it in the ground, it'll be mutter? Why do you have to take a root? In other words, you're going through different dargers. The first dargar is, again, we're not farmers, but you plant something, nothing. If you plant something, a day later, you dig it out, nothing happened. It's the same thing. Good? You wait a week later, a few days later, you can begin to see it sprouts in. When it sprouts in, at that period of time, the oim is going to matter it. The oim is going to matter it. Good? So the Gemara wants to know, if you're telling me Tizra B'Sadeh, how do you know Zriya? How do you know Hashrasha? Maybe just the fact that it's planted. It's so long as it's in the ground, it'll be mutter. Al Yedei the Oimer. That's what the Gemara wants to know. In other words, you went to the other extreme. If you tell me it's Rasha Tizra, Hihachi Afagav Lo Hishrish. Nami. Amalei. So Rava told Rav Papa, Sudani. This, if you read quickly, means like Sydney, right? But no. Sudani. We're going to see a Rashi in a second. Sudani, Besodek Siv. Asher Tizra Besada. What does Besada mean? It can't be. Sada means it's a field, right? It's a field. A field means it must have what? Have taken some root. Now, why did Rava call Rav Papa Sudani? This is a very, very interesting conversation. Look at Rashi right before the Mishnah, Sudani. Talmidei Chachamim. Sudani is a Talmud Chacham. Al Shem Soid Hashem L'Reyav. Hashem reveals his secrets to what? To those who fear him. In other words, you could have called any of the Amoraim Sudani, correct? According to this Pshat. Any of the Amoraim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu would reveal his secrets to. Lishnach Rina, and this I'm sure we're going to get a lot in a blog. Lishnach Rina, Rav Papa Rami Shechra. Rav Papa was, as we know, as Kenny used to call him, Papa Weiser. He was a beer merchant. He was a wealthy beer merchant, Rav Papa. So Rami Shechra Have, Kidamina Mipsachim, Ilav de Ramoy Shechra, if not the fact that you made beer, lo yisasrei, I wouldn't have gotten wealthy. Said I got wealthy from making beer. With Sudani Mikri, and he was called Sudani. Kidamin and Hassam. Tamrei b'uchlasach avi Sudana royet. But my correlate Sudani, soid noah shemasheres v'gemilas chasadim. It's a soid noah because it makes you wealthy. So according to Sudani, he's calling him on his profession rather than what his limit Torah. Nassim, you had a question? Yeah. Listen, we don't have the closed caption person over here reading, right? The deaf,
Hello? Now
Yeah.
you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. By Bays and Gimel, it also says Vidilma, the Bach.
Yeah, Nachanami. Vidilma, right.
You
You're
didn't
right.
say it. I'm saying, are you supposed to say Vidilma all three times?
I said it once, and I thought it was self-understood that you would say it the other times. I mean, Benji understood it. Dak understood it. Okay, very good. Says the Mishnah. Now we said you can't cut, right? You can't cut before the Omer. You can't cut. The only thing you can cut. If you remember, they found the Yerushalayim. They used to pull it out with their hands, right? They would pull it with their hands. That's as a shinoi. You can't cut. The Reishis Ketzircha, the Omer has to be the Reishis Ketzircha, right? So you can't cut. So, but however, the places where you can't bring the oima from, you could cut. The places where you couldn't bring the oima from, fellas, there, in fact, you could cut, as we see right now. Koitzin beis hashlachin, sheba amokim. Now, these are the valleys. These are irrigated. They're not sustained by themselves. They need irrigation, and they're in a valley, and the quality is poor, as we saw Rashi said. So since the quality is poor, you're not going to bring barley from there. You're not going to bring it from there. Therefore, you're permitted to go ahead and cut it because there is no way. You're not going to bring it. You're not going to bring it as the omer. However, avaloi goitchen. We're worried that you might come to eat it, so therefore you cannot heap it up. You can harvest it, but you can't heap it up. Anshe Yerichai, koitzim beratzon chachamim. The men of Yerichai, they went ahead and they cut with the chachamim agreeing to it. The goitchen shalei beratzon chachamim. So in other words, we're bringing a Maisa that substantiates the halacha that you just mentioned. This obviously Yericha, the quality of the barley was poor, and therefore what Yericha was known as Ir Tamarim, was known for its dates, right? But it's the quality of the barley was poor. You're not going to bring the omer from there, and therefore you're permitted to go ahead and cut. Mashen Kain, you're not permitted to heap up, and the Anshe Yericha they heaped up. The Chachamim did not make a macha; they didn't protest their actions. Koitzel l'shachas. Now this is important. Everything's important, but this we're going to spend a lot of time on. Koitzel l'shachas, meichel lebehema. So what's another thing you can cut? You can cut shachas. You can cut the fodder for the animal. The shachas that grows that it's not grow right.
It's a 1/3 growth.
Yeah, you can cut before the omer. You can go ahead and cut the shachas to feed to your animals. we're gonna have a machloikus. Did it grow a shlish or not grow a shlish? That's why I didn't comment. It's machloikus in the Gemara. So don't. Rabbi Yehuda, a Masai, when is it permitted to cut? Bisman shem maschel actually heavy shlish. As long as it's less than a shlish, it began growing and it's less than a shlish, then you can cut it. So in other words, the Tanakama seems to say even a shlish you could cut, and Rabbi Yehuda seems to say it has to begin at the time. Now, guys, we're going to see in the Gemara anytime it says Amasai, Rabbi Yehuda is coming to be mafarish. So this is not usually you would say it's a second shita, that the Chachamim are saying that even if it grew a third, you could cut, and comes from Rabbi Yehuda and say, no, it's not true. Rabbi Yehuda, guys, is explaining the Tanakama, meaning when the Tanakama says you can cut the shachas, provided it didn't grow a shlish. How do you know that? Look at the next opinion. Rabbi Shimon Oimeh yiktzah v'yachal af m'shevi shlish. So Rabbi Shimon says Rabbi Shimon, no. And so the Gemara would ask Rabbi Shimon Hainu Tanakama, right? The same thing. Okay, so we'll go back to this Bez Hashem, we do the Gemara, but we have two separate sheetas. The koitz in another mifnei netiyos, you can cut mifnei netiyos. Rashi brings two pshatim, either because it's going to ruin the tree, or it's gonna and therefore it's not good anyway, or kalayim, guys. You're worried about you planted tefua, and what happened, netia means a sapling, and after you planted the tefua, it began to grow. So you had a kalayim problem. So another place where you would be able to cut before the omer is what is for kalayim. So far we have an extensive list. Right, the first case being you can cut in beis hashlachim because it's not ready to come. Then we have the case of b'shachas for animals, and now we're saying in addition because of kalayim, right? Then you could cut, or it's not ready to come, so you can cut between the trees. Another example, you can cut mifnei beis ha'ovel. They would go ahead and they would have the menachem ovel in the field after the levaya, so that you go ahead, you'll be able to cut there for the mitzvah of nichum avelim. You'd have a place, right? In addition, a place to go ahead and learn, right? They would go ahead and they would sit, so that if they mitzvah, you'd be able to cut this area in order to create a place to learn. Okay. Layasin oisa krichos, you shouldn't go ahead. Okay. Yeah. Layasa alav of krichos, you can't make them, even though you could cut, you can't make them alumim, you can't make them piles tied up. You leave them on piled but not tied up. Mitzvah oimer, love min hakama. The mitzvah of oimer is to come out from standing grain. You should cut it. Matzah, if you didn't find standing grain, yave min ha'amarim. Then you go ahead and bring them out from the amarim. You would bring them out from the piles, right? If you don't find what cut, then you bring it from the amarim. You bring it from piles, cut grain. Mitzvah love min halach. It's a mitzvah to bring it out from lach, from moist. Like matzah yavi yavesh can mean yaves. So in other words, of course you want to do mitzvah min hamufcha, guys. So you should cut it, right? If you can't cut it, if you find it cut already, you could take that b'di'evet. L'chatchila you should find, try to get lach moist. B'di'evet, if you don't, then yavesh should be okay too. Mitzvah liksa b'layla. It's a mitzvah to go ahead and cut it at night. Niksa b'yom kasha. If you cut it during the day, what will be kasha and v'doicha es Shabbos. So these many halachas. Okay, the first halacha was that you could cut a beis hashlachim, right? That even though it's a mitzvah, we learned rashis, the first cutting from challah, right? We said that the first cutting is from challah. We're going to find out that you could cut. Now, where do you know that from? So the following limud. Tanya, Rabbi Yamin Oimer. Rabbi Yamin is of the opinion, Kosav Echad Oimer, one pasuk says, Uketzartim es ketzira, ve'evesim es Oimer. It's mashma, guys, what? Any ketzira, right? All it says is what? You should cut a ketzira, ve'evesim es Oimer. As long as before the Oimer, you can cut anything. Guys, before you bring the Oimer, you can cut anything, right? Uksiv, and it also says, Reish ketzirchem ela kayin. So how do you explain how can you reconcile the two? The first one says any cutting. Second one says reishis ketzirchem. So that's okay, tzad. From the place that you could bring the oimer, the place where you can be the oimer, iyata kaitzer. That you can't cut. That you need reishis katzirchem. Mimakim shiata mevi, but from a place where you can't bring, like the beis hashlachin, at the kaitzer you could cut. Good. So again, we have a contradiction in the pasuk. One here it says uksatim es katzira ve'vesim es oimer. As long as it's before the oimer mashma, you can cut anything. And then it says reishis katzirchem. It's mashma na what? That only the first cutting. Only the first cutting. Yeah. So how do you reconcile? If it's in a place you could bring the oimer, it's reishis katzirchem. If it's from a place that you can't bring the oimer, then what? Then it's ve'vesim es oimer. It's ksatim es katzira ve'vesim es oimer. Fred the Gemara kasha. Ema mimin shata mevi at the kaitzer. Mimin shata mevi at the kaitzer. Guys, maybe from barley you can't cut, but maybe everything else you could cut. In other words, why do you darshan that it applies from any place? Maybe you can't cut. Maybe you can't cut barley in any place, even in a place where you won't bring from. Maybe it just says barley you can't cut, but anything else you could cut. Why don't you darshan it that way? In other words, I have another possibility to reconcile the stira. Reishis katzirchem doesn't mean barley. Gutsatim es katzira vesim es oimer is anything else that's not barley, right? Anything else. So says the Gemara. You can't say that because with Rabbi Yonason, guys, we learned from Rabbi Yonason that what? Remember, Rabbi Yonason. If you look at I said rachis, right? We learned that what? Rachis, that it has to be the first thing, and also it goes to all the 5 grains. So you can't go ahead and learn them in a minute. It has to be in the 5 grains, everything, and therefore you can't go. Okay, what do we say about Anshe Yericho? Guys, Anshe Yericho, they cut with the Daser Chachamim. They heaped up without the Daser Chachamim. And the Chachamim did not protest. Okay, nice Gemara. When I say nice Gemara, I mean it's not so hard. It's a euphemism for not so hard. Says the Gemara. Man shamalei the Omar Micha v'loy Micha. Who was the man the Omar? We said that he protested or didn't protest. It's Rabbi Yehuda. Now, you're telling me that Rabbi Yehuda was okay with them cutting. Right? The Rabbi Yehuda Katsir the Anshe Yericha b'Ratzon Chachamim Habe. The Chachamim were okay with them cutting. For Tanya, we have a brayso in Masechta Pesachim. Shisha devarim asu Anshe Yericho. 6 things the men of Yericho did. Shloisha b'Ratzon Chachamim. 3 with the Ratzon of the Chachamim. 3 with the Ratzon of the Chachamim. Ushloisha shloi b'Ratzon Chachamim. And 3 without the Ratzon of Chachamim. Ve'elu sheb'Ratzon Chachamim. And these are the things that Chachamim were okay with. Markivim dekolim kol hayoim, right? That on Yudalid you're not supposed to do work, right? But they would say this is not such a big thing to go ahead and graft the kolim the whole day. The korchen Shema, they would. The Pesachim says they weren't mafsik between v'hayim shemay shlei amru brach shem kavah machus olam ved. They weren't mafsik being echad v'hafta. In other words, the karchin is like made a sandwich, guys. So they made a sandwich. They didn't say Baruch Shem, or they went right from from echad to the v'hafta. So they didn't. Again, I'm just repeating what the Gemara says in Pesachim. That's not our inyan. That's not what we need yet. But again, we should at least say what it means. So they were karchin. They went in from the hafta from echad. The koitzin l'fnei oimer. That's what we need. B'ratzon chachamim. Okay, so far so good. Ve'elu shalei b'ratzon chachamim. Koitzin l'fnei oimer. They went ahead, as we saw in the Mishnah. They piled it up. Umatirin gemizia shel hegdish. If a tree was hegdish, they used the fruit because they held that the gedulim weren't hegdish. They held that the tree was magdish for its wood, and the thing that grew is gedulim hegdish, not kodesh. So that the Chachamim were not agreeing with that. Shel charuv shel shikma, and they used and I said fruit, the carrot tree and the sycamore tree, right? Because they used for their wood, and they used it for their fruit. Upartzin pratzais biganosayim upardasayim. They would open up in their ginos and in their orchards, lahachal neshel la'aniyim b'shani b'tzuros b'shabbos z'yom tovim. So apparently a very, very nice thing. Good. What would they do? They would open up their field that in a year of a famine, on Shabbos and Yontif, that the aniyim would have something to eat. Apparently, it seems like a very, very nice thing, but be aware that what are you worried about? If they eat from what fell down, they may come to take from Tolush, and therefore they weren't happy. So they may come to go ahead. I said Tolush Mechuber. They may come to take Mechuber. So again, that's your concern. Your concern is that So these three things they were not happy with: Kedisha, the using the wood of the tree, using the fruits of the wood of a sycamore tree and a char tree. And they also weren't happy with what the fact that they opened up their fields for aniyim on Shabbos v'yontif, that they may come to go ahead and take, if they take from the ground, what?
So why Shabbos? You mean they might do Mulach on Shabbos?
Yeah, they're going to come to Mulach. Yeah. Now, Dibri Reb Meir. Now, all these are the words of Reb Meir. Amuloi Reb Yehuda. Now, guys, what's the question we want? The question is that Reb Yehuda would not be happy with them going ahead and cutting. That's what we want. Amuloi Reb Yehuda in Baratzah Chachamim Heim Oisin. You call them Oisin came. Why Dafka to Anshe Yerucha? Guys, if this is Baratzah Chachamim, why do you say that Anshe Yerucha? It could be anybody. So why do you mention Anshe Yerucha? Ela elu ve'elu shalai baratzon chachamim. You know what you're telling me? That all six are shalai baratzon chachamim. There's your kasha, guys. If all six are shalai baratzon chachamim, included in the six is what? Is cutting the oimer. Including the six is cutting the oimer. So what's the difference? On three of them they protested, and three they didn't protest. Good? So who's the one who said Micha v'loi Micha? It's Rabbi Yehuda. The same Rabbi Yehuda said also, you can't cut. So you're telling me that Baratz and Chachamim, they cut with the Oimer Anshe Yericho. You see Rabbi Yehuda says, no, they didn't. Ve'elu shloi Micha b'yadam, makivim dekolim kol hayoyim, v'karchim v'shema, v'koitzim v'koitzim v'oimer. Ve'elu shemicha b'yadam, and what's the one that they were Moicha, what they protested on the base, is Matirin Gemizio shel Hegdish, v'shel Chuv, v'shel Shikma, u'poitzim pertzosayim, begin to sayim, u'partasayim, k'dei lahachel neshel aniyim, b'shani b'tzurois, b'shabbasos u'b'yom tovim. Now, v'noisten peya liyerek, and they would give peya liyerek, and they were moicha because by giving peya liyerek, it wasn't mechuyev ma'isa. You took it over the ma'isa. Now,
just the opposite. He's just the opposite.
You just listed seven. You added this pay. You added one, right? But all of them they were not happy with. So what's the kasha? We have one kasha. Rabbi Yehuda said that what? That they were happy. They was fine. That they cut the oimer. According to Micha, Rabbi Yehuda was not happy. Okay, Fred the Gemara all taimech. According to your reasoning, Shisha, there was only six. Shiva Have, there were seven. Right? You added the paya. You know what, guys? Elasami mikan katsira. Take out the word katsira. Katsira, the taka we're happy with. Guys, you listed seven things. And one of them was what? Katsira, right? You listed one of them was Katsira. And they were not happy with Katsira, and you said they were fine with it. So what's the teretz? It says Shisha, and you listed seven. Take out one. Which one are you taking out? Katsira. The male is very good. The sixth one is Peya, right? Peya, and you took out. Okay, nice Gemara. Then you took that out. Okay, let's go back to the Mishnah. You're able to cut the stubble for Maisa Behema. That you could do. Rabbi Yehuda a Masai when from the time it started growing till it bore a third of its growth. Now, Reb Shimon said even after it grew a third, you can go ahead and do it. The aside, guys, is Kitsira. If something's Kitsira, you can't do it. So l'chayra paship shat, if it's less than a third of its growth, das Haitian is kind of Kitsira. It's not calling Kitsira, so you didn't cut it before the Oimer. Right? That you cut it before the Oimer. Reb Shimon is of the opinion that since you cut it for a behema, since you cut it for an animal, then what? Then it's not considered Kitsira. Again, that l'chayra is the machlokes. So let's see the Gemara inside. Kaitza l'shachas l'maychal lebehema. You can feed it to the animal. Tanan hasam. The elu mafsikin lepeya. Now we know peya is taken from a field. If you have two fields, you have to give two payos. If you have three fields, you have to give three payos. Let's say you have a field and you have a hefsek in it. Is it considered one? If it's considered afsaka, you have to leave two payos. If it's not considered hafsaka, you leave one. In other words, is it what makes it two fields? What divides it to make it two fields that you would have to leave two separate payos rather than it be considered one field and you putter with one payer? That's the Mishnah and payer. That's what the Mishnah and payer is discussing. The Elu Mafsik and Lepeya, Hanachal is a stream, Vashalulis is rainwater gathered, V'derech HaYachid, V'derech HaRabim, either Derech HaYachid 4 Amis, Derech HaRabim 16 Amis, Ushvil HaRabim, a path of the Rabbim, Ushvil HaYachid, HaKavua B'Mosa Chamad, U'Mosa Geshomim, use it year round, not just what in certain times. V'Habar, a bar is a hefsik, V'Anior, and a field, Havar is a field that's left empty, not a bar. It's a field that's left empty. Vanir, a field that's plowed. Zera acher, or a field that is plowed. If you have two fields of soirim in the middle of the field, you have wheat, then you chayv and pay on the two soirim fields, right? The koitzel l'shachas. Now here's what we need: the koitzel l'shachas, and if you cut l'shachas, mafsik divrei Reb Meir. These are the words of Reb Meir. The chachamim moimim ein mafsik, and the chacham says it's not mafsik. Elam kain charish. Okay, let's explain this. If it's considered katsira, it's considered one field. In other words, touch the word katsira, it means harvest. So if I'm in a field and I start in the middle harvesting, just because I'm doing in the middle of the field, it doesn't divide the field. It doesn't divide the field. It means I began harvesting my field. So the fact that if it's here's the aside. If it's considered katsira, it's one field. If it's not considered katsira, then it's two fields. In other words, if it's not considered katsira, then I have some type of path in the middle of the field, some type of hafsaka, and you can't tell me my action is an action of katsira because it's not a katsira. Good. So over here in our Mishnah, let's go through the Mishnah and Peah, and we're going to go ahead again. Rabbi, they're not talking on Mishnah. Let's do the Mishnah and Peah again. What we need. What is mafsikling in Peah? Go to the last case. If you're koitzel l'shachas, it's mafsik. Meaning, if you're koitzel l'shachas, it's not considered a katsira. You're not harvesting. You're bringing for your animals. Memela, if I have a hafsaka there in the field, it creates two separate fields because I didn't begin harvesting. I cut for my animals. How are we doing? Guys, you got that? That's important. Yes, nothing.
Sucker, a hole. Everything else is 4 feet, 10 feet, 3 amas. A bar doesn't go the whole length.
This is not a bar. This is not. I didn't say bar. I corrected myself. The hover it means you left the field empty. You left it fallow. Okay, you left it fallow. Okay, so now, guys, you hear the side. Guys, you hear the side. Everyone, are you awake? You good? Yes. Okay. So according to Reb Meir, fellas, according to Reb Meir, if you're shachas, it's not considered katsira. What does our Mishnah say? What does our Mishnah say? According to Reb Yehuda, it is considered katsira if it grew a third of its growth. According to Reb Shimon, it's not considered katsira because Reb Shimon said you can go ahead and cut. Good. Now, says the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Baruch Chana, Rabbi Yochanan, Reb Meir b'shitas Reb Shimra Amra. Reb Meir, he said his opinion in the Shita of Shimon. You can even after it reached a third of its growth, and now it's considered harvesting. If I'm cutting for an animal, I don't care. Almuk, sava, kol shachas, anything that's for an animal. Lav katsira, he is not katsira. So let's go back to our Mishnah, guys. Let's go back to our Mishnah. Says our Mishnah. What is a permission? What could you cut before the Omer? What can you cut before the Omer? Koitzel l'shachas, Michael behema. You can cut shachas, Michael behema. On Rabbi Yehuda, Amasai, provided it didn't reach a shlish. But if it did reach a shlish, then what? Then you can't, right? Because that would be considered harvesting already. Says Reb Shimon, no. Even when it reaches a shlish, it's not harvesting, meaning it's not a katsira. So now you have synonymous. Reb Shimon and Reb Meir are together, guys. You hear? Reb Shimon and Reb Meir are saying the same thing. They're saying as long as you're harvesting for an animal, it's not considered harvesting. If it's not considered harvesting and you have a patch in the middle, it's not like I began harvesting my field. You have a hafsaka. So l'chayra, that's how we get into. So the Mishnah in Pei of Reb Meir and the Mishnah in Menachos of Reb Shimon are synonymous. That ketzira for an animal is not a ketzira. Now, right now, the Havamin is that Reb Meir says is din even when it reaches a shlish, right? Even when it reaches a third of its growth. That's what the Gemara assumes right now. Says the Gemara Vaita. Esvei Rav Acha bar Yosef Rabba v'kamal al Shmaitza. Rabbi was sitting, they said over the sugya that we said that Reb Meir goes in the shita of Reb Shimon. Esvei Rav Acha bar Huna l'Rava. Ask Rav Acha bar Huna to Rava. Ach l'chagav, if a grasshopper ate in the field, or ker sumuhu namalim, or the ants got it. Rashi brings that the grasshoppers get the top and the ants get the bottom. Either way, you're going to have a patch in your field that you don't want. You can have a hafsaka in the field. Now, this hafsaka is not man-made. This hafsaka is made through creatures. Or sheberaso haruach, or the ruach went ahead and made a hefsek in the field by blowing. Hakol moidim, everyone's moida, the following. Chorash, if you do charisha, then mafsik. Then it's going to be mafsik. Loi charash, if you don't, then aina mafsik. Then it's not going to be, if charash, if you go ahead and you do an act of charisha, then it's going to be considered what? It's going to be considered a hafsaka. If you don't do charisha, then it's not going to be considered a hafsaka. If you don't do charisha, it's not going to be considered a charasha. That's the difference between the two. Now, the Gemara fears us. Hakol moida ma. Who's moida that it's not considered a hafsaka is Reb Meir. No, Reb Meir says it is a hafsaka when you have a. In the Mishnah, he said in the Mishnah that if you went ahead and cut it for an animal, you cut it for an animal. So hakol moida, that if you do an act, it's gonna be a hafsaka. Lo charash ein mafsek. Hakol moida man. Reb Meir. I amit b'shleima masnisam b'shlei avi shlish. B'shleima, you're going to tell me our Mishnah is speaking where you didn't bring a shlish, and brisa the charish in lo charish loy b'shehevi shlish, and the brisa with the ants and the grasshoppers is speaking where it grew a third, and therefore you make a chilik what? That charish is the beginning of Ketzira, loy charish loy. Guys, if charish is mafsik, right? It's a third of its growth. It's a third of its growth, right? It's a third of its growth. And now you go ahead and be charish. So therefore, what are you doing? You're cutting and you're being mafsik. You're creating a hafsaka. So that Mishnah is speaking about the Mishnah in Peah is speaking a shlish, and our Mishnah is speaking where you didn't bring a shlish. Okay, our Mishnah is speaking where you didn't bring a shlish, and that Mishnah is speaking about where you didn't bring a shlish. So very good. So now, if you tell me that's the case, then we can say charish in charish loy, and therefore the Mishnah is Reb Meir could go ahead and agree with that Mishnah. In other words, Reb Meir says by us, it's not a shlish, and therefore he holds like Rav Shimon. He holds he can't hold like Rav Shimon, right? He can't hold like Rav Shimon. That's the problem. Ishlam, you tell our Mishnah speaking where there's not a shlish, it didn't grow a shlish. It can make sense to say that what Reb Meir says by cutting for an animal less than a shlish, it would be a hafsaka. And the Mishnah there is speaking where what? And the Mishnah in Peah is speaking where it grew a shlish. Eli Amit Masnisa Nami. Our Mishnah is also speaking what? Where it grew a shlish, because you told me that he holds like Rav Shimon. Guys, remember, if Reb Meir holds like Rav Shimon, he holds it grew a third. If he holds like Rav Shimon, he holds it grew a third, yes? Again, outside. Our Mishnah at L'chayra is speaking what? It didn't grow a third. It grew a third, because we want to say Reb Meir holds like Rav Shimon. This Mishnah over here, you're going to say what? That it didn't grow a third. It doesn't make any sense to say that. Bishlam, you say over here, it didn't grow a third. That makes sense to say that it's not considered Ketzira. And this is speaking where it did grow a third. But if you can tell me he held like Rav Shimon, then there's no point. Hakol moedim, madach where what? Guys, look at me. Madach where man did it, it's considered, right? Madach, you have to tell me on Mishnah that what the man did it, that it's considered what the Hafsaka. It says that's very right. I'm going to get it clear. Says the Gemara. No, so Bishlam, if you tell me our Mishnah is not, you didn't grow a third, and therefore you can't hold like Rav Shimon. And the Mishnah in Peah, where it did grow a third, that's when we make a chilik between Choresh or Loy Choresh. However, because he holds like Rav Shimon, Hashta, Uma Hosam, over there in Peah, Kitsira, you're saying Kitsira the Adam, Amarab Meah, Loishma Kitsira, in the Mishnah, in our Mishnah. Again, Hassam according to Rabbi, made an open on Mishnah, guys. You tell me Rabbi holds like Rav Shimon. So Ma'adoch in our Mishnah, where you tell me Rabbi holds like Shimon, it grew a shlish. Still, Rabbi says it's not a katsira. Certainly, if a creature went ahead and harvested it, it's not considered a katsira. So, okay, let's do it outside. Guys, we want to suggest, fellas, that Reb Meah and Rav Shimon hold the same thing. Just Rav Shimon said, if it grows a third of its growth, and you go ahead and harvest it, a third of its growth, you go ahead and harvest a third of its growth, then what? It's not a katsira. And that's Rav Meah, and Rav Meah says the same thing. Now we're bringing a Mishnah from Peah. The Mishnah in Peah clearly can't be speaking that it also grew a shlish, according to you, because then you have a problem. Madach in a case where a bus of a dom went ahead and cut it for an animal, it's not considered a katsira. Certainly, where a creature, a grasshopper or an ant cut it, certainly it's not considered a katsira. So it must be speaking that what? Our Mishnah is speaking about where it didn't bring a shlish. If Mishnah didn't bring a shlish, then Rav Meah can't hold like Rav Shimon. Rav Shimon says it's a shlish. So it can't be true that Rav Meah holds like Rav Shimon. Our Mishnah must be speaking what? Where you didn't bring a shlish, and therefore, since you didn't bring a shlish and you cut it for an animal, therefore it's not a hafsaka. And the Mishnah there is speaking where you bought a shlish. So that you wanted to say that Rav Meah holds like Rav Shimon is not true. It can't be. Rav Meah can't hold like Rav Shimon. Why? Because our Mishnah can't be. Rav Meah can't be speaking where it grew a shlish, and Rav Shimon is speaking where it did grow a shlish. And what's the machriya? It's because the Mishnah in Peah must be speaking that it grew a shlish, and therefore our Mishnah must be speaking it didn't grow a shlish. So because of that kasha, we say the following: Ella, it must be that Rav Meah said b'shitas Rabbi Yehuda. Now, what did Rabbi Yehuda say? Look back at our Mishnah. What did Rabbi Yehuda say in our Mishnah, fellas? Right? So, in other words, this is geschmack. This is perfect, fellas. Perfect. Guys, perfect. Given the Mishnah in Peah is speaking where it grew a third, and Rabbi Meah's Moida where it grew a third, that charish and lecharish loy. It's Moida. Good? It must be therefore our Mishnah speaking where it didn't grow a third. That's Rabbi Yehuda's Shita in our Mishnah. That would fit in great with Rabbi Meah. Our Mishnah, it didn't grow a third, like Rabbi Yehuda, and the Mishnah Peah grew a third. The problem is, Rabbi Yehuda was speaking where it was harvested by a person, not by a creature. Says the Gemara. No, excuse me. Rabbi Meah said his din when you kaitza for people. Rabbi Yehuda only said his din when you kaitza for animals. Rabbi Meah holds, guys, Peah, that it's a shlish when you're harvesting for people. Rabbi Yehuda said it for animals. That's the Gemara's kasha. Let's see it inside. Pshitas Rameya Amra. The Amra Emasai Bismacha Hiskal Achlehevi Shlish. Avalim Hiskal Achlehevi Shlish Asar. So therefore, Rameya holds like Rabbi Yehuda. Frag the Gemara. Emi L'Shamalei Rabbi Yehuda LeBehema. That's when it's not considered Katsira. La'odam Yishamalei. Dim Kain Havila Tilsa Tanoi. You would have 3 Tanoim. Guys, you'd have 3 cases. You would have what? Remember I spoke out? You had the Tanakama, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Shimon. And therefore, and we know anytime it says Rabbi Yehuda Omer, it's Mefarish. And therefore, what you can't have 3 opinions. One by Behema, one by Adam, and Rabbi Shimon by Adam. You're going to say Rabbi Shimon by Adam, right? You have three different opinions. The Tanakama by animals, Rabbi Yehuda by people, and Shimon by people. So it says the Gemara that can't be shot. Or Rabbi Meah by people. It's not Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meah by people. Elo Kiyasa Rav Dimi, when he came from Eretz Yisrael, Omer Rav Meir b'shitas Rabbi Kiva Rabbi Yomi. He said in the name of Rabbi Kiva is Rebbe. Afla Adam Nami Lehavi Katsira. Even by Adam, it's not a Katsira, Geshmak. Right? Right? Until it's a third. Right? Until it's a third, Afla Adam Lehavi Katsira. So in other words, this is the Shita of Rav Meir. Right? As long as it's not a third of its growth, it's a half sukkah, it's not a Katsira, once it's a third of its growth. Ditnan, Hamanam is Sader, a person is making his field into a leopard. What does that mean? He's cutting here, 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 here. V'shayba klachim lachim. He leaves rows like little open, little closed, like a leopard. It's spotted. Rabbi Kiva oimer peya l'chol echad v'echad. You have to give peya for each row, right? V'chacham oimim me'echad ala kol. V'am Rabbi Yehuda Mishmuel l'chay Rabbi Kiva el benam l'kloyes, which is bas making it for achilas adam. Aval benam l'oitzer loy. So now the kloyes is where it didn't grow a third of its growth, guys. The kloyes it didn't grow a third of its growth. So when does Rabbi Akiva say is din? Guys, look at me. Rabbi Akiva said is din by Michael Adam. By Kloyos Michael Adam, where it didn't grow a third of its growth. That's Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir said like his Rebbe. Rabbi Akiva is saying Kloyos, which is what? Not a third of its growth. And it's Michael Adam, like Peah, right? Then, so you see that Rabbi Meir is holding like Rabbi Akiva. However, Le'oitzer, which is a third of its growth, low. A third, right? Ini. So in other words, Reb Meir holds like Rabbi Akiva. That what? By Adam, if it's less than a third, it's a half sukkah, and if it's less, if it's more than a third, then it's not. It's katsira. Fred the Gemara Kasha. V'kiyasa Ravin Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mechayev Hayer Reb Kiva Af Ben Manam Loitzer. Rabbi Kiva said, Labrias. Rabbi Kiva said, fellas, even if it's a third of its growth. Even if it's a third of its growth, fellas, it's going to be la'itzer. And Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Meir disagrees with that because he says less than a third. So the Gemara answers, Sabala kavase bechada. Rabbi Meir holds like Rabbi Akiva bechada that what? That less than a third, right? It would be what? It would be not considered afsaka. Upol like bechada. Rabbi Akiva says afilu what? Rabbi Akiva says, "Afilu la'oitzer if it goes a shlish," and he disagrees. I sent out. We'll go through it just quickly, guys. Take a look. I sent out a very very nice chart. This is just to summarize. I know the last piece of Gemara was difficult. I'm sorry. I'm sorry if I didn't explain it well. Okay, let's see what we got. Okay, when you cut for an animal, when you cut for Adam, good. The Tanakama of Rabbi Yehuda wa Mishnah. You know, Rabbi Yehuda explains the Tanakama. Oh, yeah, I'll wait till you get it. We have it? Okay. The corner Tanakama reviewed about Mishnah. Remember, he explains the Tanakama. If you cut for an animal, if it didn't bring a shlish, it's not a katsira. When it brings a shlish, it is a katsira. And when you cut for an adam, havi katsira. Anytime you cut for an adam, even if it's less, guys, even if it's less, it's a katsira. According to Rav Shimon, when you cut for an animal, it's never katsira, even a third of its growth. And kashoytz lo adam, lahava min aloi havi katsira, lamaskana havi katsira. Rav Meir of Peah, right? That Rav Meir of Peah, that it's according to Rabbi Yochanan, it's not a katsira. According to Rav Acha Rav Dimi, toli be'eshlish. According to Rav Yochanan, it's not a katsira. According to Rav Meir, according to Rav Acha Rav Dimi, who came from Eretz Yisrael, it's if it grew a shlish, then what? Then not. If it didn't grow a shlish, then it's not a katsira. Okay, when you cut for an adam. According to Rabbi Yochanan, it's not a katsira. Rav Lazar and who is that? Toli b'ava shlish. I don't know what that is. Chachamim of Peah, it's a katsira. Either way, it's a katsira, even if it's less than a shlish. According to Rekiva, according to Shmuel, it depends what it is. According to Rabbi Yochanan, it's not a katsira. According to Shmuel, it depends upon what. According to Rabbi Yochanan, I have a katsira. According to Shmuel, if it grew a shlish, it is a katsira. If it didn't grow a shlish, it's not a katsira. Okay.
even there's no difference